Have you ever wondered why the moment a woman withdraws her energy from a man, his world begins to shake as though some vital light has suddenly gone dim? At first, he may pretend not to notice. He may convince himself that nothing has changed, that her silence is only temporary, that her eyes still see him the same way they once did. But deep in the hidden corridors of his unconscious, he feels it. The withdrawal of the feminine is not merely an absence. It is a rupture, a tearing away of the mirror in which he once saw the best of himself reflected back. For so long he believed her energy was simply there, like air or sunlight, something eternal, something granted without cost. He fed on her attention, her emotional labor, her ability to soften his rough edges, without ever questioning how much of himself he had given in return. He did not realize that her presence was not a given, but a gift. And when the gift is finally retracted, when she gathers her spirit back into herself, he faces the most haunting of companions, regret. Carl Jung taught that a man's soul is not whole without the anima, the feminine archetype living in his unconscious. The woman he loves, the woman whose energy he has grown accustomed to receiving, becomes the vessel through which he projects this inner feminine. When she gives of her heart, he feels illuminated. When she looks at him with trust, he sees himself as stronger, more capable, more worthy. But projection is not true seeing. It is illusion. And when she withdraws, he is forced to confront that the goddess he worshipped in her was never truly hers to give. It was his own soul, waiting to be integrated, and he had not yet done the work. You may have felt this dynamic yourself. You gave and gave, pouring out patience, love, and care, believing that if you just showed him enough of your devotion, he would awaken to his own greatness. Yet what he did was take without recognizing. He accepted without bowing in reverence. He mistook your flow of energy for permanence, and in that blindness he fell into entitlement. When you finally pull back, when your eyes no longer soften at his presence, when your words no longer bend themselves to soothe his ego, he feels a loss that terrifies him. For the masculine without the feminine's gaze is stripped of illusion. Without her energy weaving meaning into his days, he is left with the raw silence of himself. He begins to notice the hollowness in his achievements, the coldness in his own reflection. What once seemed enough now rings empty, because her energy was the invisible music that made his existence feel whole. Regret comes like a shadow, whispering of the moments he overlooked. He remembers the night she stayed awake while he spoke of his failures, the way her hand rested on his shoulder without judgment. He remembers how she laughed at his smallest jokes, how she gave him the benefit of the doubt when no one else would. And he remembers, with a pain that cuts deeper than anger, the way her eyes once sparkled at the sight of him, eyes that now look past him, eyes that no longer carry the same fire. But regret is not only memory, it is the psyche's attempt to force awareness. A man confronted with the loss of the feminine is truly confronted with the loss of his own unconscious anima. Jung would say he is meeting his shadow, the rejected, neglected aspects of his own psyche that he projected outward onto her. He regrets not because she has vanished, but because he sees, perhaps for the first time, how he failed to integrate her light into himself. And what about you, the woman who withdraws? You may wonder if he notices, if he suffers, if his soul aches as yours once did when you carried the weight of one-sided love. Yes, he does notice, but he notices too late, for the psyche is slow to awaken without suffering. His regret is the fire that begins to burn the illusions away. Yet you must understand, his regret is not your responsibility. It is his initiation. The Stoics said that what is borrowed must one day be returned. Your energy, your compassion, your endless nurturing were never his to own. They were a loan from your soul. And now you reclaim them not in cruelty but in necessity. For the woman who constantly gives without boundaries dissolves into a ghost of herself. Withdrawal is not punishment, it is rebirth. So when he regrets not merely the loss of you, but the loss of the man he could have become in your presence had he awakened sooner. He regrets the hours he wasted thinking your love was unconditional, when in truth all love has conditions: respect, reciprocity, reverence. He regrets the ease with which he dismissed your tears, the arrogance with which he assumed you would always stay. And perhaps the deepest regret of all is this, that he mistook your devotion for weakness, when in reality, your ability to withdraw is the ultimate expression of strength. When the feminine withdraws her energy, the man is left not only with regret, but with an echoing silence that gnaws at him in ways he cannot name. This silence is not merely the absence of her voice or her touch. It is the absence of a mirror to his soul. Jung observed that without the anima, a man's life becomes barren, for she serves as the bridge to meaning, imagination, and depth. And when she retreats, he must face the stark desert of himself, stripped of illusions. In the beginning, he may resist this truth. He may run faster into distraction, burying himself in work, in the fleeting intoxication of other women, or in the hollow victories of social approval. He may even pretend that her withdrawal was inconsequential, that he has not noticed the collapse of the invisible scaffolding she once built around his life. Yet the psyche cannot be deceived indefinitely. There will come quiet hours when the mask slips, when the night grows too still, and in that stillness, the absence of her energy roars louder than any sound. What he regrets in those moments is not simply that she is gone, but that he never truly saw her while she was there. He recalls how often she spoke with depth, yet he only half listened, consumed by his own thoughts. He recalls how many times she waited for him to rise, to meet her at the level of her devotion, and how often he chose complacency instead. Her withdrawal forces him to confront that his failure was not lack of opportunity, but lack of courage. And here lies the paradox. The feminine withdraws not in anger, but in clarity. When she withdraws her energy, it is because she has finally recognized the truth of her worth. She has seen the imbalance, the quiet erosion of her spirit, and she chooses no longer to sustain what drains her. She returns her energy inward, reclaiming the power she once poured outward, and in doing so she enters a new realm of sovereignty. This act is archetypal, for the feminine is not only the nurturer, she is also the destroyer of illusions. In mythology, she is Kali, who cuts away falsehood with her blade. She is Persephone, who descends into the underworld and refuses to return unchanged. She is every woman who has ever realized that to save herself, she must no longer save him. The man who loses her feels this archetypal withdrawal as a death. He mourns not only the woman, but the self he believed he was when reflected in her gaze. Regret is his grief for the identity he can no longer maintain. Without her, he cannot escape his own emptiness. He begins to understand that what he thought was strength was often her patience. What he thought was his charisma was often her encouragement. What he thought was love was often her sacrifice. And do you see what this means? The moment you withdraw your energy, you are not merely walking away from a man. You are ending an archetypal dance, disrupting a psychic contract in which you carried more than your share. Your silence, your absence, your refusal to keep feeding what does not feed you, these become his teacher. Your withdrawal exposes the imbalance he could not see while you were still there, still cushioning him with your warmth. Yet beware of this truth. Many men will confuse regret with love. Regret can sound like longing, it can mimic devotion, but at its core it is the pain of loss, not the reverence of recognition. The man who regrets often does not love you as you are. He loves the reflection of himself he once saw in your presence. Jung would say he longs for his anima, not for the woman herself. And until he learns to integrate that inner feminine, his regret will remain a hunger that no external woman can satisfy. This is why withdrawal is necessary for your individuation. As long as you continue pouring into a man who cannot meet you, you are trapped in the cycle of his unconscious projections. You become the vessel of his unacknowledged soul, and in doing so, you lose sight of your own. But when you reclaim your energy, you shatter the illusion, for him and for yourself. You discover that your worth was never determined by how much you gave or how deeply you were needed. Your worth is inherent, independent, sovereign, and so his regret deepens. He realizes too late that he mistook your silence for weakness, when it was the ultimate display of power. He regrets that he did not listen to your warnings, did not respond to your pleas for reciprocity, did not notice the slow fading of your laughter. He regrets that the very thing he thought he could take for granted, the devotion of the feminine, was in fact the most fragile, the most sacred, the most irreplaceable. This is the tragedy of the unconscious man. He awakens not in the presence of love, but in the aftermath of its withdrawal, and that awakening, though painful, is the only path left for him. For when the feminine finally withdraws her energy, what he regrets is not only her absence, it is the realization that she was always the bridge to his own soul, and now he must cross it alone. There comes a moment after the dust of withdrawal settles, when the man begins to see not only what he has lost, but what he never truly possessed. In Jungian terms, the anima he projected outward collapses, leaving him with the raw fragments of himself. This collapse is shattering, for it unmasks the truth that what he adored in her was often the hidden feminine within him, calling for integration. Without her presence to bear that weight, he must turn inward or be consumed by emptiness. Regret then deepens into something sharper, the recognition of his own negligence. He regrets the conversations he dismissed, the emotions he trivialized, the sacrifices he never acknowledged. He remembers her words, once spoken softly, that now echo like thunder in his memory. The tone of her laughter that has vanished from his life becomes a haunting melody, reminding him of the richness he squandered. These regrets are not sentimental, they are archetypal, the psyche punishing itself for its blindness. For the feminine, the act of withdrawal is not merely emotional, it is spiritual warfare. To withdraw her energy is to refuse the archetype of the martyr, the self-sacrificing caretaker who bleeds herself dry for love. It is the moment she steps out of the unconscious role of Anima for him and reclaims herself as sovereign. And in that reclamation, she embodies the path of individuation. She refuses to live as a projection of another's psyche. She insists on being whole unto herself. The man's regret then is twofold. First, he regrets the loss of her devotion. Second, and far more devastating, he regrets the exposure of his own incompleteness. Without her energy, his shadows come crawling forth. He sees the insecurity he covered with bravado, the laziness he disguised as confidence, the emotional cowardice he justified as stoicism. Her withdrawal strips away the comforting illusion, and he is left staring at the unpolished truth of who he really is. You must understand, this is why he often returns after you withdraw. Not because he has suddenly discovered his devotion, but because he cannot tolerate the silence of his own psyche. You were the balm that quieted his inner unrest, and without you, the restlessness grows louder. His regret is not always repentance. It is often desperation. This is the distinction the awakened woman must make, to see whether his return is born from true transformation or from the ache of losing his reflection in you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. In the same way, the man's soul becomes dyed with the absence of the feminine once she departs. The color of regret, of longing, of recognition without remedy, these stain his inner world. Yet he cannot blame her, for the Stoics also remind us that what belongs to you will remain, and what leaves was never truly yours. His regret is not a punishment inflicted by her. It is the natural consequence of his own negligence. And the feminine? She walks away differently than he imagines. He thinks she withdraws in anger, but in truth she withdraws in clarity. She has seen that love without reverence is exploitation, that devotion without reciprocity is depletion. Her energy, once scattered outward, now begins to pour back into herself, and in this reclamation she transforms. No longer does she seek validation through his acknowledgement. No longer does she measure her worth by his ability to choose her. She has chosen herself, and that choice is liberation. This is the juncture where archetypes split. For the unconscious man, regret becomes a chain. For the conscious woman, withdrawal becomes wings. She rises not because he has failed her, but because she has finally understood the sacredness of her energy. And though he may ache with memories of her warmth, though he may replay the days of her devotion like a man starved for water, she does not return to that role. She knows that to do so would be to betray herself, to step back into the cage she has already broken open. Here is the psychological truth that burns. The feminine was never created to save the masculine from his shadows. Her role was to reflect, to inspire, to invite him into wholeness. But the journey of integration is his alone. When he refuses that path, she cannot walk it for him. Her withdrawal becomes his initiation, his crucible of fire. If he rises from it, it will be by his own inner work, not by her return. And yet regret lingers for him like smoke after a fire. He regrets the moments he took her softness for weakness, the times he silenced her intuition with his logic, the years he confused her patience with permanence. He regrets that he only learned the sacredness of her presence in its absence. And perhaps at the deepest level, he regrets not her departure, but the man he refused to become when she was still willing to believe in him. Regret is a slow poison in the masculine psyche once the feminine has withdrawn. At first, it enters subtly like a whisper in the night, but with time it corrodes every layer of denial. The man may attempt to harden himself, to armor his heart with pride and distraction, but the loss of the feminine's energy is not something easily replaced. For what he lost was not merely a woman, but the archetypal force she embodied, the muse, the healer, the mirror of his soul. Without her, his inner world becomes gray. His victories feel hollow. His laughter echoes without resonance. Jung often spoke of the anima as the soul image within a man, the bridge between his conscious self and the unconscious depths. When she withdraws, it is as if that bridge has been burned. He can no longer reach the hidden parts of himself through her presence. He must now walk the difficult path alone, and regret stalks him like a shadow he cannot outrun. Every memory of her becomes both a wound and a mirror. He remembers her devotion not with gratitude but with grief, because he sees it now for what it truly was, rare, sacred, and unrepeatable. This regret is sharpened by realization. He remembers the moments she reached for him when he was emotionally absent, the patience she extended when his words wounded her, the way she forgave without ever being fully seen. He remembers her silence in the final days, when her heart had already begun its retreat, and he understands too late that silence was not peace, it was resignation. He regrets not only what he lost, but who he was when he had her. A man asleep at the altar of love, blind to the sacred offering before him. But what of the feminine in this moment of withdrawal? She is not cold, though he may call her so. She is not cruel, though he may paint her as heartless to soothe his pride. In truth, she is awakening. For too long she bore the weight of both his anima and her own soul, a double burden that drained her spirit. Her withdrawal is not spite, it is survival. She has seen that to remain is to lose herself, and so she gathers her energy back like a queen reclaiming her crown. And as she rises, something shifts within her. The part of her that once waited for him to awaken, that clung to the hope that her love could change him, begins to dissolve. She realizes that her worth was never dependent on his recognition. She was not incomplete without him. Rather, she was diminished by pouring into a vessel that could not contain her depth. Her withdrawal is a return to herself, to the wellspring of power that was never meant to be siphoned endlessly into another. The man left behind regrets with increasing intensity. He regrets that he did not honor her boundaries, that he mistook her giving nature as a resource rather than a gift. He regrets that he silenced her warnings with excuses, that he laughed off her intuition as irrational, only to discover she had been right all along. He regrets that he thought time was infinite, that she would always be there, waiting, forgiving, enduring. And in this regret lies a deeper psychological truth. He regrets not simply her, but the version of himself he could have become through her. For the feminine, when honored, awakens greatness in the masculine. She calls forth his courage, his tenderness, his capacity for transcendence. In losing her, he loses not only a partner, but a path. He regrets the squandered chance to evolve, to meet his own anima through her presence, to rise into a man of true depth. Yet you must hear this clearly. His regret is his burden, not yours. Too often, women are seduced by the sound of a man's remorse, mistaking it for transformation. But regret alone does not make him conscious. Jung himself warned that nothing changes until it becomes conscious, and many men dwell in regret without ever transmuting it into awareness. His tears may be real, his longing sincere, but unless he confronts the shadow that drove him to take her for granted, he remains unchanged. That is why the feminine's withdrawal is so powerful. It creates the crucible where his choice becomes clear, to integrate or to repeat, to step into the painful work of shadow confrontation, or to numb himself with distractions and seek another woman to project his anima upon. Many men will choose the latter. Few will choose the former. But either way, the woman who has withdrawn must not look back. For her journey is not about whether he evolves. It is about her own return to sovereignty. And so as he sits with regret, she steps into rebirth. He feels the weight of absence, but she feels the wings of freedom. He clings to what was lost, but she opens to what can be gained. He lingers in the past, but she walks forward into her individuation. This divergence is the ultimate truth of withdrawal. It is not merely the end of a relationship, but the splitting of two paths. One path circles regret, the other ascends to empowerment. There is a silence that follows the withdrawal of the feminine, a silence more deafening than any argument, more haunting than any spoken goodbye. It is the silence of finality. The psychic vacuum left when a woman no longer extends her life force outward. The man who once swam unconsciously in her endless tide finds himself stranded on dry land. He may rage, he may bargain, he may attempt to summon her back with promises, but beneath it all lingers the one thing he cannot escape: regret. It creeps into his thoughts at unexpected moments. In the middle of laughter with friends, in the quiet between tasks, in the hollow satisfaction of another woman's attention. He remembers her eyes, how they once softened in ways no one else's did. He remembers her words, sometimes tender, sometimes fierce, but always laced with a sincerity he never fully recognized. Regret tightens its grip as he realizes that no substitute can replicate the unique quality of her presence. What he lost was not generic, it was singular. Jung wrote that the anima not only inspires but unsettles, for she forces the man to confront his deepest truths. When the feminine is present, even if unconsciously, she shapes his inner world. She awakens his imagination, his longing for beauty, his drive toward wholeness. When she withdraws, that fire dims, and he must face the barren landscape of a psyche unwatered by her presence. His regret is not only emotional, it is existential. He regrets that in her presence, he stood at the doorway of his own transformation, and he never walked through. For the woman, however, withdrawal is not merely departure, it is initiation. By pulling back her energy, she refuses to serve as the carrier of his unrealized self. She stops being the unconscious vessel of his anima and begins embodying her own archetype of sovereignty. This act is terrifying to him because it shatters the dynamic that allowed him to remain asleep. He regrets her absence, but more profoundly, he regrets the collapse of the illusion that she would always be there to hold his shadows for him. You too may know this moment. The moment when you stop explaining, stop pleading, stop waiting. The moment when you finally see that your devotion has been taken as an entitlement, and you decide, quietly, resolutely, to end the transaction. In that instant, you withdraw not only from him, but from the archetype of the overgiver. You reclaim your energy as sacred currency, no longer to be spent recklessly on a man who refuses to rise. This is the crucible of empowerment, the turning point of your individuation. There is a sacred inevitability in the man's regret. Once the feminine has withdrawn, he may deny it, he may bury it beneath pride or distraction, but it waits for him like a shadow that lengthens with the setting sun. Regret is not only the memory of what he has lost, it is the dawning awareness of what he failed to become. In her presence, he was offered the chance to grow, to rise, to embody a fuller self. In her absence, he is left with the unbearable truth that he squandered that chance. The feminine energy, when freely given, is life-giving. It nourishes, inspires, softens. It calls forth the noblest qualities in a man if he is awake enough to receive them. But when he takes it for granted, when he treats it as background music rather than sacred offering, the day inevitably arrives when the music stops. And in that silence, his regret grows louder than any voice. He regrets not only her departure, but his blindness, his passivity, his failure to honor what was rare and holy. For the woman, this withdrawal is not simply a turning away from him, it is a turning toward herself. She has carried too long the archetype of the giver, the healer, the one who holds space for his wounds without receiving equal care for her own. Jung wrote that individuation requires the reclamation of the fragmented self, and for the feminine, one of the deepest fragments to reclaim is the energy. She pours endlessly into men who cannot meet her. Her withdrawal is not rejection of love, it is the restoration of balance. And yet how often has the woman been taught to feel guilty for this act? How often has she been told she is cold, heartless, unforgiving when she finally chooses herself? But you must see the truth beneath these accusations. They are the cries of a man confronting his own shadow. His regret disguises itself as blame, because it is easier for him to accuse her of cruelty than to face his own failure to cherish her. His words may sting, but they are nothing more than the echoes of his unconscious pain. The wise woman recognizes this and does not bend. She knows that returning to soothe his regret would only reset the cycle, re-entangling her in the role of carrying his anima for him. True change cannot be birthed by her sacrifice. It can only emerge from his own confrontation with the shadow. She withdraws not because she lacks love, but because she possesses wisdom. The man in turn is confronted with the archetype of loss. Regret shows him the cost of unconsciousness. He regrets the softness of her hands, the patience of her listening, the fire in her eyes that once looked only at him. He regrets the security of knowing she was there, the comfort of her forgiveness, the quiet heroism of her endurance. But most of all, he regrets his own blindness, that he had all of this and never saw it clearly until it was gone. And do you feel the liberation in this? To know that his regret is inevitable, that the energy you gave was never unnoticed, only unrecognized, that in withdrawing, you do not diminish your value, you magnify it. For absence speaks in ways presence cannot. Your silence becomes the loudest voice, your distance the most powerful lesson. His regret is the echo of your worth reverberating through the corridors of his unconscious. Seneca wrote that every new beginning comes from the end of another. For the woman who withdraws, this is the threshold of transformation. She has ended the chapter where her worth was tied to his recognition, and she begins the chapter where her worth is self-sustained, self-defined, self-honored. She no longer measures her value by his regret. She sees his regret for what it is, the natural consequence of his choices, not a reflection of her lack. The masculine may spend years haunted by what he lost. His regret may follow him into other relationships, into moments of triumph that feel strangely empty, into nights when memories of her still flood his dreams. But the feminine, once withdrawn, no longer lives in that shadow. She rises beyond it, carrying with her the hard-won knowledge that her energy is not a currency to be spent cheaply. She learns to invest it where it is honored, reciprocated, and revered. This divergence is archetypal, eternal. He may remain chained to regret, while she ascends into freedom. He may circle endlessly around memories of her devotion, while she steps boldly into her own becoming. He may ache for her return, but she has already returned to herself. And in the end, that is the essence of this dynamic. His regret is his prison. Her withdrawal is her liberation. He regrets the woman he lost. She celebrates the woman she has found within herself. His longing binds him to the past. Her sovereignty opens her to the future. He learns too late that the feminine's energy was never his to keep, and she learns finally that it was always hers to reclaim. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.